Sure, me.
Yes, he did.
Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. We used to have a show on PBS called Zoom. I don't think they mentioned Zoom as often as we have in the past couple of years, but here we are. We hope everyone is safe and inside and enjoying our seasonal weather. Hey, we have a special guest on next up. He's John Chimkas, retired congressman who spent 28 years in the military. He was also part of the Baltic Caucus and served on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. He'll be talking to Alvin and Ray on the second half about Ukraine. Let's meet the panelists on this edition, starting with the co-host of the Jennifer and Wendy show on KTRS, Wendy Wiese, along with Mr. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and STLtoday.com. Ray Hartmann with RawStory.com, the Riverfront Times, and KTRS. And from the St. Louis American, where he edits the news and writes the sports column, Mr. Alvin Reid. Well, we want to thank Bentley Blair, who is directing this episode, because our director and executive producer, Anne-Marie Berger, is enjoying herself as she prepares for her big birthday on Sunday, the 27th. And I think somewhere out there we have a compromising photo of Anne-Marie, if we could show that to you. And I'm assuming you're seeing that right now. I don't happen to see it, but we wish Anne-Marie a happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Amen. Okay. Bill McClellan, I want to ask you about retired Senator John Danforth, who gave an interview this week. He said that polling he's conducted suggests an independent can win the U.S. Senate race this year. Of course, Roy Blunt Jr. is giving up his seat in the U.S. Senate, and there are quite a few Republicans and Democrats vying for that. Danforth says his polling indicates an independent can do that, and he also says that that person, he guarantees, will be well funded. What do you think about that?
Oh, I don't even know where to start. I mean, in the first place, any poll that shows that that people are not hyper partisan these days is really in question. I mean, you can look at Lincoln County a couple of years ago. Remember the big deal about Carla Alsbury, who ran for circuit clerk as a Republican and never run for anything, and the Democrat who had the office, who'd held the office for a long time, got beat, and the judge had the good wisdom to change from being a Democrat to a Republican because he knew that a Democrat couldn't win in Lincoln County. And things are just hyper partisan. I mean, try to win an election in St. Louis as a Republican or a dog catcher anywhere outstate as a Democrat. And yet Senator Danforth has a poll showing that people are willing to vote for an independent. I mean, I wish it were true, but it seems to me it's sort of like the old guard, knowing that a old guard Republican wouldn't have a chance in the primary, thinks that, well, maybe if they sneak one in after the primary, he can win. It's just not very realistic.
I'm not very good at math, but the way the polling breaks down, Bill, I didn't understand. He was saying that the compassionate, conservative, alternative centrist would receive 28%. The Trumper would receive 31%. The Schumer loyalist would also receive 31% with a margin of error of 3 to 3.5%. To me, that would put the centrists at a fairly, a disadvantage. What I think is interesting here is he is ordained, or he always has been, an ordained Episcopalian minister. I think that he is deeply haunted, for lack of a better word, about his early support of Josh Hawley. And I do believe that what he is trying to do is introduce the idea, at least politically, of healing. I think it bothers him. If you hear these interviews with him, he is profoundly bothered by that advocacy of whom he's somebody he now sees as a.
Wendy, I'm sure he is, but the idea that a centrist Republican who wouldn't have a chance in the primary could somehow get support in the general election from Democrats or maybe Republicans who don't like Eric Greitens, assuming he gets an and then the first guy who jumps in is a old Democrat. And I thought, oh my gosh, I mean, that's not what Danforth had in mind.
I guess. Oh, go ahead, Alvin.
No, go ahead, Ray.
I gotta say, this whole St. Jack Act has kind of worn thin with certainly me, a lot of people, I think. And yes, I'm glad you mentioned that the last time he weighed in with his expertise was to give us Josh Hawley, much like he gave the country Clarence Thomas as a Supreme Court justice. But, I mean, what could go wrong with somebody putting their faith in polling? It's done so well in recent cycles. The only question is, I think it's fairly clear that he's just wrong. And I mean, that no independent, regardless of money, is going to win. I think the harder question is, if you talk to Republicans, they're pretty convinced that it'll help elect a Democrat. And I think if you talk to Democrats, they probably think it'll help elect a Republican. I think it's more math than anything else. And it would really depend on which Republican emerges and which Democrat emerge from their respective primaries. But I think it's nonsense.
Well, I mean, I still have great respect for Jack Danforth. Okay. He messed up with Josh Hawley, and that's clear. I think Josh Hawley fooled him. I honestly do. I don't think that it was a misjudgment in character. I think the character just changed the spots, like the Lincoln County judge changed to a Democrat. Josh Hawley saw the writing on the wall and said, instead of behaving like I have some sense, I'm going to behave like just a partisan zealot. I think an independent candidate would come closer in a lot of races across America, including this one. I think Vicky Hartzler had a good line on when you're on sign-up day, I'm sorry, but for lack of a better term, registration. But she said, I would support any Republican candidate except for Eric Greitens. That includes McCloskey. That includes the whole field out there. And I think that's what maybe Danforth is saying. And I think what other Republicans are probably, concerned with is that Eric Greitens could lose not only to a Democrat, but if an independent, moderate Republican, moderate Democrat ran, maybe they scrape up enough votes to make up that 4 or 5%.
Well, Alvin, I think I might agree with you. We have to move along. I just want to jump in real quickly.
I think that the opposite would happen. I think that if Eric Greitens gets the nomination and there are Republicans who think, oh, I don't want to vote for Eric Greitens, but they're hesitant about voting for a Democrat. If all of a sudden there's this centrist candidate today, say, oh, great, I'll vote for him. Meanwhile, the Democrats are voting for the Democrat and Eric Greitens gets in.
Well, I will say, to defend John Danforth, I always thought it was great when he stood up on principle and he did not vote to ban burning the American flag. And I thought that was a difficult decision that he made at the time. And I hope that he's right, that someone who is not hyper-partisan on either side can win. Don't forget, Arthur Schlesinger wrote the book Cycles of American History, and he said that politics is kind of like a pendulum. It kind of goes back and forth. And maybe Danforth is right. We're ready to go back where someone who's kind of moderate like him can get elected.
He's as shadowy as his money, but Eric Greitens will not be the nominee.
Let me ask you, Wendy, about a race in St. Charles County where the county executive, Steve Ellman, will be up against one of the best-known state senators, at least one who gets the most press attention, Bob Onder. Onder, the allergist, has been term limited out of his job in the General Assembly, so he's taking on Steve Ellman, also a former member of the General Assembly, who presides over St. Charles County, which is booming with population and jobs and more. They both are raising money. Turns out that about 95% of Onder's money is coming from outside of the district. $100,000 came from his brother. As for Ellman, he's raising most of the money in the district, but let's face it, that Bob Onder, he's got a lot of name recognition. He's probably as well known as any state senator in Missouri. What do you think?
I think that is probably true, especially with the fact that he has spent so much time and grabbing so many headlines lately by some pretty divisive positions, even within his party, in terms of. He doesn't want certain materials to be introduced in schools. He wants people to be able to carry weapons on transportation systems owned by the state. I think that's kind of risky. I think Ellman is very popular. I think he is still very popular, and in spite of the volatility of these times, people are going to go with the person. I'm just speaking off from the heart. I think people are going to go with the ones that make them feel comfortable. And I think that's Steve Ellman.
Yeah, you're being nice, Wendy. Steve Ellman would beat Bob Onder like a rug.
Okay, well, there is that. You could say it.
Because, I mean, the vaccination rate.
Rented mule.
Yeah, the brakes, right? Beat the brakes off of it. I mean, the vaccination rate in St. Charles County is much higher than it is in rural Missouri. And Bob Onder appeals as a state legislator to rural Missouri. I don't think he is, like you said, I think Steve Ellman is much more popular in St. Charles County than Bob Onder. I don't think that's a race at all.
I don't know if I'm handicapping it. I love the fact you mentioned that Onder got $100,000 from his brother. People might not know this, but his brother Jim won the zillion-dollar talcum powder case, and so he's the very kind of trial attorney and there's others I think that support Onder who are sort of a traditional Democratic base. And that's just a little detail. He also, Onder, of course, is only interested in running if he can. You think Sam Page is working on the side. Onder's an allergist in West County, and I think in St. Charles, and he wants to be sure that he can be an allergist as much as he wants. I wouldn't think that's going to play very well. He's also just a demagogue. I mean, the guy's got a medical degree from WashU, a legal degree from SLU, and he acts like he's this down home, stoker of space. It reminds you a lot of Josh Hawley in terms of just how disingenuous and what a demagogue he is. But I guess people got to figure that out themselves in St. Charles.
Well, I just want to throw in one thing, and that is that actually St. Charles County has a higher vaccination rate than the city or the county, St. Louis County.
No, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But Alvin's right.
Alvin, I want to ask Alvin about a real estate proposal for the corner of Lindell and Kings Highway in the Central West End. The Koppler family, which gave us through the years the Chase Park Plaza, Maryland Plaza, Channel 11, and more, is planning a 30-story, $135 million residential tower. And according to published reports, they'll be looking for tax breaks. Now, you have this beautiful tower overlooking Forest Park and the setting sun to the west. Does that really need a subsidy that would take money from the public schools?
Absolutely not. I mean, the piece of land that it's on is just some of the most valuable real estate probably in the state of Missouri. I call it the Pineapple Building, where those are condos, I guess, and apartments. And that building, or whoever the developers are, got a tax break as well. By the way, I call that the SpongeBob because I guess he lives in there. But this will be where the administration of Tashara Jones, they're not really just saying yes to any proposal. And whatever the initial proposal is, if it gets winnowed down, I would be happy with that, but I would really be happy with zero.
Me too.
Well,
it is the premier corner in the city. I mean, right there at the park in the Central West End, and I know there's a parking lot there, and I've sometimes wondered, why is there a parking lot there?
Good point.
But it just seems like if somebody wants to build a deluxe condo or high-end apartments, it's a great place to do it. And we shouldn't have to be, the city should not be subsidizing any of it.
But if the Pineapple Building received tax breaks,
Yeah.
why wouldn't why wouldn't the Coppler / Albion Chicago, Albion Central West, whatever it's going to be called, why wouldn't they expect it? They said that they're willing to work with the Tashara Jones administration for, to do their part in the area of affordable housing. But until we bring this to a stop, we can't pick and choose, can we?
I think you can.
I think when
I'm not mad at Crestwood because they kind of gave into the developers, and I guess Dearborg's, they're going to redo the old Crestwood Mall site because it is sat empty and it's just like a big prairie field now. I mean, so that project, maybe I can get with, we got to do something with it, but something will ultimately be built where the parking lot is, Bill. And I think somebody will come along and says, I don't need anything.
I mean, wait a minute. I don't look. I don't like the subsidies anymore than anybody else's program. But why would you start with the Copplers? I mean, it does
after everything they've done.
Because I mean, sure, let's go. Once the Cardinals start paying for some of and frankly, I believe the MLS stadium will be getting a fair amount of subsidy, indirectly or directly. And it's like, I mean, and certainly that family, the Taylors, have got a lot more dough than the Copplers.
Hey, I can tell you why you start. I can tell you why you start with the Copplers, because it's a new administration. I mean, the Jones administration did not do the Pineapple Building.
Right.
We'll see.
I talked to a friend of mine, Craig Riggins. You probably hear him once in a while on the radio. Craig Riggins told me he graduated from high school in 1977. He went to public school in the city of St. Louis, and he said that the grade school, middle school that he went to, they are still the same buildings, and they were old when he attended them. And we have just taken so much money out of the schools through all sorts of tax breaks to developers. I mean, it's got to stop somewhere. And at least on the prime pieces of property. The problem, as you all know, is that the St. Louis Development Corporation gets 1% of all the tax breaks. So there's a perverse incentive for this organization when it grants tax breaks.
Charlie, who I'd like to hear weigh in on this is Greater St. Louis. We don't hear much from them. They're right. They're in the development business themselves with Arch to Park. And I'm curious what they think, because they're all about the central corridor. And I'd be curious how they come down on this, because, they don't do much north or south. It's all in this corridor. I wonder if this is in the central corridor. It'd be interesting.
Well, in the central corridor, Ray, is the Loop Trolley, which is now mothballed, but it is going to start running again around June 1st, we think, connecting the History Museum down to Bolivar, take a left there into the Loop. And we all know that it cost about $50 million, $30 million from the feds, but it really wasn't that much of a success. But last Friday, the Bi-State Board said, we're not going to put money into it, but we will operate it just so that we don't lose that federal money. We want the feds to claw back the money if we permanently end the Loop Trolley. Isn't that kind of like establishing a Potemkin village? I mean, nobody's going to be riding it. It'll operate Thursdays through Sundays, and we'll pretend that we're operating.
Well, I think Talby Roach deserves a lot of credit, in my opinion, as the CEO of Bi-State, for stepping up and being willing to say the truth. Well, first of all, as a transportation asset, it's a disaster. It has been. It's proven failure. But Bi-State also operates, I think the best way to look at this is to think of it as a riverboat. And I know that sounds strange, but Bi-State operates the Robert E. Lee, a couple of the riverboats, in addition to the Arch Tram. A lot of people, and an airport in Illinois, a lot of people don't realize how many things are on Bi-State's plate, and they do it well. I mean, whatever one thinks about buses and trains, they do it well. They are capable, more than anyone, of making sure, as he says, that the trains are in good condition, that the equipment works, that it runs on time, and most important, that it doesn't hit things. The Loop Trolley Association was a disaster, and it's essentially been fired, okay? And I didn't believe at the time this happened, it's why I sort of got off the trolley, that we'd really lose the federal money. But people who are smarter than me about this, including Talby and Tashara Jones, say we will. And it's simply, whatever you think about the trolley and all the emotion, if it can work as a tourist attraction, as an amenity to the accoutrement to the Loop, funded mostly by people who shop in the Loop, the TDD down there, then I don't see any reason we should just, based on our cynicism about it, just say we'd rather lose untold tens of millions in the future. I just don't see it's worth that.
I think the only people that go ahead, Wendy.
Go ahead, Evan.
I would say, like, well, the folks in the TDD district are the first ones to say, like, if they just say, like, we're not paying it anymore, or I'll close my store or something like that. I mean, that would be a definitive moment where that would be calling the federal government's bluff. It's easy for me to say because I still think that I just don't think the feds would claw back that money. Now, maybe I'm naive, but. And I'm not the mayor, and I am not, the county executive or Toby. It's easy for me to say, but I might have played that a little longer just until they set a deadline or something like that. In the meantime, Ray, I agree with you kind of in that why take the chance? It runs. It's not costing us anything, is it? In reality,
shop in the Loop.
I like that way of presenting it or of getting used to thinking about it, Ray. It's still an incredible amount of money for something that most of us think of as, a boondoggle. But if anyone would say unequivocally that no, the feds aren't going to claw back this money, it would be Tashara Jones. I have had my issues with Talby Roach and some of his positions on security on Metrolink, but he seems to be absolutely sincere with this, saying that I hate this, but we have to do it.
Yeah, the people that we should be upset with is the federal government. Well, here's a project and we say, well, we tried it and it's not working. They say, well, we're not going to argue that, but keep doing it.
Off. Yeah.
Bill's right.
I agree with Bill.
Bill's right.
Absolutely.
Charlie, can I add one thing real quick? Bill's right. And let's not forget, the federal government selected it out of like 65 projects. We won the competition at one of 5 or 6 cities. They picked it. So I agree with Bill about that point.
Wendy Wiese, I want to ask you about a proposal in Jefferson City, which would allow certain workers in public schools, like janitors and teachers, administrators, lunch ladies, to carry firearms if they are trained, if the school is not proximate to a police force, and if the employee wants to do that. So, trained workforce carrying firearms, what do you think?
I know that this is it's a really divisive issue, but I think if you asked parents whose kids have been impacted by violence in schools, I think you'd see almost a 50-50 split. I really do. Because there is a certain amount of training. I believe it is 118 hours initially, and then they have to be recertified every 2 years. But if I have a child in school, or if I'm thinking of my grandson being in school, I would not have a problem at all with some adult being authorized to carry a firearm in case an Adam Lanza made his or her way into a school building, and you have all of these tiny innocent lives at stake.
Well, I as a grandfather who has 2 children in a school, I'm much more worried about an accidental shooting or somebody losing their temper, carrying a firearm. Nothing against teachers, nothing against janitors, nothing against the cooking lady, but they might be having a bad day. And I think that's a greater risk than having a Adam Langsdorff or whatever his name was, the Sandy Hook guy. I mean, that's getting hit by lightning. I think that the more weapons you start having in a school, the more likely there is for a problem.
And
well, I think we've had a lot of lightning strikes, Bill. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I don't think that I'm not to the point where that means everybody can carry a gun in school. I'm very uncomfortable with that. There are a lot of incidents that we don't learn about involving altercations between teachers, people who work in schools, and students. A lot of them. And this is just another really bad idea. not to make light, but what could go wrong with that? Well,
Yeah,
a lot.
I agree. And my fellow founder said it far better than I, but I will add to Wendy's point. Yes, we need an adult. It's called a police officer. And if we need more police officers and trained security guards, by all means have them. Almost everything, almost anything that could happen with a teacher or a maintenance person, whatever, is bad.
Actually, I think Wendy is correct. I mean, you could have a retired police officer, a retired veteran who is now teaching in the school, has a lot of experience. In fact, a lot more experience than maybe the security guard that you see at a bank. I walk into a bank, I'm not afraid. And we don't see that these security guards are having a bad day and shooting people. So why would we think the cooking lady would be doing that? The key, as Wendy points out, the key is training. And you have to do a background check.
But
okay. Do you arm the tellers and the loan officers too? I mean, that's not, no one's arguing against security guards. That's
somebody.
I'm not arguing against security guards and trained police.
You're arguing against the cooking lady.
I'm
arguing against the fake teller.
Hey, Alvin, I want to ask you, Alvin, about Lindenwood. We have a minute to go.
Okay.
Lindenwood is going D1. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or you don't care?
Oh, thumbs up. They could be like the Gonzaga of the Midwest. Now, Gonzaga out in Seattle, all the rest of their sports are D2, but basketball is D1. You get in this conference, you go to a bowl game, you play some team, probably you might get slaughtered or whatever. You're early in the season. They could play Missouri. They could play a large school. All of a sudden, people know that there's a Lindenwood University, and nothing but good could come from that. It will also help enrollment. I know this plays out every time. It's the strangest thing. Teams get in a bowl game, teams get in the NCAA tournament, and all of a sudden people from all around the country start applying to go to that school. So it's a good thing.
Alvin, do you really want Lindenwood beating Mizzou? Because you know Mizzou will schedule
Wait,
he does.
You did. Note that I did not say I did not say KU because they would beat KU probably.
I think it's great, and I mean, we'll see what happens, but
All right, get your season tickets now. Hey, that's all we have for this program. However, next up, which is the second half of this hour, Alvin and Ray will be talking to retired U.S. Representative John Chimkas, Republican from Illinois. The topic, Ukraine. Representative Chimkas was part of the Baltic Caucus, and he also served on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. He has definite opinions on Ukraine and the U.S. response to the Russian invasion. That's next. Have a great week.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.